The question of whether Jesus Christ truly walked the earth has fascinated and perplexed scholars, theologians, and historians for centuries. Was he a real person? A preacher who lived in ancient Palestine and whose life and teaching sparked a religious movement that would eventually span the globe? Or is the figure of Jesus Christ nothing more than a myth, crafted by early Christians to give substance to their beliefs? To unravel this mystery, we must journey through a landscape of ancient texts, historical records, and archaeological findings, each offering clues to the truth. This is a story that has been told and retold, debated and defended for 2,000 years. Now, it is our turn to ask, did Jesus Christ truly exist? We begin with the historical sources that lie outside the Bible. For those who doubt Jesus' existence, the lack of contemporary records documenting his life is often the cornerstone of their skepticism. The Gospels, which present the most detailed accounts of his life, are seen by many as biased, written by believers with a vested interest in promoting their faith. But can we rely solely on these religious texts, or is there evidence of Jesus' existence in the writings of those who did not follow him? To find out, we turn to Roman and Jewish historians who lived in the centuries following Jesus' supposed lifetime. One of the most significant names that arise in this search is Tacitus, a Roman historian writing in the early 2nd century. Tacitus was no friend of the Christians. In fact, he despised them. Yet in his annals, he mentions a figure named Christus, who was executed under the authority of the Roman governor Pontius Pilate during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. According to Tacitus, this execution did little to stop the spread of a movement that came to be known as Christianity, which endured even after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 years after Christ. Tacitus's account is brief, and he was writing nearly a century after Jesus' death, but his words offer an important piece of independent evidence, a non-Christian source acknowledging that Jesus, or at least the figure his followers called Christ, was indeed crucified under Roman law. Another key figure in this historical puzzle is Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian who lived in the 1st century. In his work, Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus mentions Jesus twice. The more famous of these references, known as the Testimonium Flavianum, has been the subject of intense debate. Some scholars believe later Christian scribes may have altered Josephus's words to paint a more favorable picture of Jesus, potentially adding references to his divinity. However, a second lesser-known mention of Jesus appears in Josephus's description of the execution of James, whom he refers to as the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. This brief but powerful mention, largely accepted as genuine by historians, points to the fact that Jesus was known and remembered by some within his own lifetime. Then there is Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor writing around 110 years after Christ, who mentioned the Christians of Bithynia in a letter to Emperor Trajan. In this letter, Pliny describes the Christians' devotion to a man they called Christ, who they worshipped as a god. Pliny's writings do not delve into the details of Jesus' life, but they offer further evidence of the early Christian movement that revolved around this figure, providing yet another thread in the historical tapestry. As we explore these ancient texts, we are naturally drawn back to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These books, written decades after Jesus' death, are the foundation upon which Christian faith is built. However, their late composition raises questions. Could these accounts, transmitted orally over the years, have been altered, embellished, or even fabricated? Were the Gospel writers recounting the life of a historical figure, or were they crafting a theological narrative to support the early Christian community? It is important to understand that the Gospels were not intended to be historical biographies in the modern sense. They were written with a purpose, to spread the message of Jesus Christ and to offer spiritual guidance to those who believed. Despite this, many historians argue that the core of the Gospel accounts, the life and death of a man named Jesus, likely reflects historical events. The consistency across these narratives, particularly the account of Jesus' crucifixion by Roman authorities, suggests that the Gospel writers were not simply inventing a story out of thin air. Rather, they were preserving the memory of a real person whose life had profoundly impacted those who followed him. However, not everyone is convinced. Enter the mythicists, a group of scholars who argue that Jesus never existed at all. Instead, they claim, the figure of Jesus was a mythological creation, inspired by earlier religious traditions. Mythicists point to the lack of contemporary Roman records documenting Jesus' life as evidence that he could not have been real. For a man who supposedly performed miracles, drew large crowds, and posed a threat to the established religious order, they argue there should be more concrete evidence. Mythicists also draw comparisons between the story of Jesus and other mythological figures from antiquity. They point to figures like Osiris, Dionysus, and Mithras, gods who, like Jesus, were said to have died and risen again. Could the story of Jesus simply be a retelling of these earlier myths, adapted by early Christians to fit their new faith? While this theory has gained some traction in modern times, it remains a minority position. The majority of historians maintain that, while elements of the Jesus story may have been influenced by other traditions, there is little reason to doubt that Jesus himself was a historical figure. But what of archaeology? Can the earth itself offer any clues to Jesus' existence? Unfortunately, archaeological evidence for the life of Jesus is scarce. This is not surprising, given that Jesus was not a king or ruler, and would not have left behind grand monuments, inscriptions, or coins bearing his likeness. However, archaeology has provided insight into the world in which Jesus lived. Excavations of Nazareth, for example, reveal a small, rural village, matching the descriptions of Jesus' humble origins found in the Gospels. Evidence of Roman crucifixions from the 1st century has also been uncovered, lending credibility to the Gospel accounts of Jesus' execution. In the end, the question remains, did Jesus of Nazareth really exist? The historical evidence, while not overwhelming, leans toward the conclusion that he did. The writings of Tacitus, Josephus, and Pliny the Younger, alongside the consistent accounts found in the Gospels, suggest that Jesus was a real person, a preacher and teacher who lived in 1st century Palestine and was crucified by the Roman authorities. His divinity, his miracles, and his resurrection are matters of faith, but the man himself seems to have been real. As we stand at the crossroads of history and belief, we are reminded that the story of Jesus, whether myth or reality, has shaped the course of human history. The evidence points to a man whose teachings inspired a movement that would spread across the world, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of billions. Whether you view him as the Son of God or simply as a man, his story continues to resonate, offering a message of hope, redemption, and love that transcends time. What are your thoughts? Was Jesus a historical figure or just a myth? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up to support our content.